Please, someone help me." The old man's hand reached up from the hospital floor, fingers spread, grasping at nothing. His lips had gone white, his eyes were open but not seeing, and every single person in that waiting room looked away. Every single one, except Dorothea Marsh. She was 67 years old. She walked with a cane she'd decorated with a strip of yellow electrical tape so she wouldn't mix it up with the ones at the senior center. Her coat had a torn pocket she'd been meaning to sew back up since November. She was there to get a prescription refilled. She had 31 minutes before the pharmacy window closed, and she had exactly $42 in her checking account until Friday. None of that stopped her. But before that waiting room, before the fluorescent lights and the cold linoleum floor, let me tell you who Dorothea was, because nobody in that waiting room knew. Nobody looked long enough to find out. Her name was Dorothea Marsh. Everyone who loved her called her Dot. The people who didn't love her, the ones who looked past her in grocery stores and talked over her at neighborhood meetings, they didn't call her anything at all. She was born in Meridian, Mississippi in 1957. Moved north with her husband Wallace when she was 24. They bought a narrow house on Clover Street in a part of Cincinnati that used to be beautiful and was now trying to remember how. Wallace worked 31 years at the Ford plant. Dot worked 22 years as a school cook at Garfield Elementary. She knew the names of every child who got free lunch. She always gave them a little extra and never made them feel it. Wallace died 4 years ago. Heart attack, February on a Tuesday, which was the most Wallace way to go. He had hated Tuesdays his whole life. After that, it was just Dot. Her daughter Renata lived 40 minutes away and called every Sunday. Her grandson Marcus came by on birthdays and sometimes Christmas. Good kids. Busy lives. She didn't complain. That wasn't who she was. Every morning started the same. 6:15. She put the kettle on, fed the cat, a big orange tabby named Percival, who had belonged to Wallace and who now slept on Wallace's side of the bed and sometimes stared at the chair Wallace used to sit in, which Dot found either comforting or unbearable, depending on the day. She made oatmeal, took her medications, the little orange bottles lined up by the sink, blood pressure, cholesterol, the small white one for the arthritis that had moved into her hands 6 years ago and never left. She checked her pill organizer the way some people check their email. Carefully. Every morning, she had one goal that Tuesday. Get to the Mercy West Clinic, get her prescription refilled, get home before dark. Her knees were bad in the cold. The forecast said rain by 4. She'd been putting this errand off for 3 days because some mornings the getting out the door felt like climbing something. But she went. That was Dot. She went. She took the bus. Sat near the front. A young woman had her bag on the seat next to her and never moved it. So Dot stood the last 6 blocks, cane in one hand, railing in the other, without saying a word. 2:45 in the afternoon. Mercy West Clinic waiting room, 40 people minimum. The chairs bolted together in rows of 6. The television on the wall, playing a home improvement show with the sound off. A child in the corner building a tower out of tongue depressors someone had given him. Dot sat 3 rows from the door. Took a number, 58. They were on 34. She pulled out the small spiral notebook she kept in her coat pocket and wrote down what she still needed at the grocery store. Bread. Those crackers Renata liked. Coffee. She was almost out of coffee, which was not a situation she intended to let continue. Then she heard it. Not loud. That was the thing. It wasn't a crash or a shout. It was a low sound, like something giving way quietly, a weight shifting, a breath stopping. She looked up. The old man was on the floor between 2 rows of chairs. He had been sitting, and then he wasn't. He'd gone down sideways, slowly, the way a very tired person goes down, not the way someone falls. His cane had skittered under the chair across from him. He was wearing a brown sweater and pressed slacks and shoes that had been polished. She could see that from here, polished carefully, and that detail cracked something open in her chest immediately. Because a man who polishes his shoes before coming to a clinic is a man who still believes in showing up with dignity. His hand came up. Fingers spread. Help. Dot looked around. 40 people. A woman in scrubs behind a plexiglass partition turned away, typing. A man in a suit talking on his phone, eyes on the window, a teenager with earbuds in. A young couple who glanced at the man on the floor, and then at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. The kind that ends with both people looking away. 30 seconds passed, she counted. She didn't mean to, but she did. Nobody moved. Dot was on her feet before she had time to think about her knees. She crossed the room in 9 steps, lowered herself to the floor beside him, with the particular careful slowness of someone whose body has opinions about sudden movements. She put her hand on his arm. "Sir, I'm here. What's happening?" His eyes found her face. He was old, older than her, early 80s maybe, dark skin, gray at his temples, a neat white mustache. His breathing was shallow and too fast. "Dizzy," he said. "Can't. You're not alone." She said it like she meant it. Because she did. She turned to the room, raised her voice, which surprised her, because she almost never raised her voice. She needed help doing it, the way you need help starting a fire in the wind. "Someone needs to get a nurse right now," she said. "Right now, please." For 2 full seconds, nothing happened. Then the teenage boy with the earbuds stood up. He was maybe 16. He went to the partition and knocked on the glass until someone turned around. A nurse came through the door. Then another. They had a wheelchair within 90 seconds. Dot stayed on the floor next to him while they worked. Her knees were going to register a formal complaint later. She didn't care. The man's eyes stayed on her face. "You stayed," he said. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. They wheeled him away. Dot got up slowly, one hand on the chair, cane in the other. She straightened her coat, sat back down. Her number was still 58, they were on 41. The woman in the seat next to her leaned over. "That was kind of you." Dot looked at the door they'd taken him through. He had polished his shoes this morning, she kept thinking. He had gotten dressed carefully. He had come here alone. He needed somebody, she said. That's all. She got her prescription. Caught the 5:20 bus. Home by 6, fed Percival. Made soup from what she had in the pantry, chicken broth, half a can of white beans, wilted celery, not much. Ate at the kitchen table, with the small lamp on. Looked out at the street. Rain had started, soft and gray, just like the forecast said. She thought about the man. Wondered if he was okay. Hoped he had someone coming. She had no way of knowing that someone at that clinic was already making a phone call. She had no way of knowing that the man in the brown sweater was Nathaniel Osei. That he had spent 43 years building one of the largest minority-owned construction companies in the state of Ohio. That he had a son who was currently on a plane back from a work trip in Portland because someone at the clinic had called him. That Nathaniel had gone to the clinic alone today because he always went to everything alone now, since his wife passed 2 years ago, because asking for help was not something he knew how to do. Dot knew none of this. She ate her soup, washed her bowl, took her evening pills, went to bed at 9:30. She woke up at 6:15 the next morning. Kettle, oatmeal, Percival. She was starting a grocery list when the phone rang. Renata calling early, she thought. Or a spam call, those came all morning now. It was a man's voice, professional, careful. "Mrs. Marsh? My name is Jerome Osei. My father is Nathaniel Osei. You helped him yesterday at the Mercy West Clinic." Dot sat down at the kitchen table. "Is he all right?" "He's okay. He's home. The doctors want him to rest for a few days, some issues with his blood pressure. He wanted me to call you, to say thank you. He was pretty insistent about it." "I'm glad he's okay," she said. "I didn't do much, just stayed with him." A pause on the line. He said, "You talked to him." The whole time they were checking him out, he said you talked to him so he had something to focus on. He has a little bit of a fear of medical settings. His wife always came with him. Since she passed. The shoes. She had known about the shoes. "I understand that," she said quietly. "Mrs. Marsh. He'd like to meet you. If you're willing. He wanted to thank you in person." Dot looked at Percival, who was washing his face on the kitchen counter with the serenity of a creature who had never once experienced embarrassment. "I'm not sure that's necessary." He said you'd say that. She almost smiled. She agreed to coffee, neutral ground. a diner on Walnut she'd been going to since 1994. She wore her good cardigan, the blue one. She almost didn't, then she did. Nathaniel Osei walked in with a cane that was newer than hers, and posture that said he'd been told to slow down and hadn't fully agreed to it yet. He was wearing a different sweater today, charcoal gray, and his shoes were polished again, and she respected that enormously. He sat across from her and looked at her the way very few people looked at Dot lately, like she was entirely there. "You didn't have to do what you did," he said. "I know that. Why did you?" She thought about it honestly. "Because you were on the floor, and nobody was with you. And that's not a way a person should be on the floor." He was quiet for a moment. "My wife would have liked you," he said. That landed somewhere in her chest and stayed there. They talked for 2 hours. She'd meant to stay for 1. She found out he was 81, that he'd grown up in Columbus, moved to Cincinnati in 1974, started his company, Osei Construction, with 4 employees and a borrowed truck. That he had 3 children, Jerome and 2 daughters. That he had 11 grandchildren, and one of them, the youngest, was named after his wife. He found out she'd been a school cook for 22 years and knew the names of every child in the free lunch program. That she'd been a deacon at her church before her knees made the early morning services hard. That her husband had died on a Tuesday. That she still cooked for 2 sometimes, out of habit, and then stood at the stove realizing it, and put half in the freezer. "I do that with coffee," he said. "Make too much. Have since Margaret passed." They sat with that for a moment. 2 people who understood exactly what the other meant. When the check came, he took it. She let him. Outside on the sidewalk, he shook her hand. His grip was firm. "Mrs. Marsh, I would like to do something for you." "Nathaniel, you don't owe me anything." "I'm not talking about owing." He said it steadily, like a man who had learned the difference. "I'm talking about wanting to." She looked at him. "I run a workforce program through my company. Osei Community Build. We train young people in the trades, plumbing, electrical, carpentry. My company partners with the city on affordable housing projects." He paused. "We've been trying to figure out what to do with a building we own on Clover Street. Corner of Clover and 5th. Dot went very still. "That's my street," she said. "I know. Jerome looked up your address last night after I told him about you. I've owned that building for 6 years. It was a community health center, closed during the pandemic, never reopened. I've had 3 different plans fall through for what to do with it." He looked at her. Not at the cane, or the torn pocket, or the coat that had seen better winters. "Tell me what that neighborhood needs," he said. "Not what a developer thinks it needs. What the people on Clover Street actually need." Dot thought about the children at Garfield Elementary. The ones who came in cold in the winter without breakfast. The ones who didn't have grandparents nearby who remembered how to can tomatoes or hem a skirt or fix a running toilet. The ones who were 16 with no plan and no net. A place to learn things, she said. Practical things. A kitchen where older people can teach younger people how to cook from scratch, because that's a life skill and nobody's teaching it. A room with tools where someone can teach a kid how to change a faucet washer or wire a light switch. Not a program with paperwork and funding cycles. Just a place. Nathaniel looked at her for a long time. What would you call it? She hadn't expected that question. The name came without warning, out of somewhere she hadn't looked in a while. The Wallace, she said, after my husband. He was a man who showed up for people. Nathaniel nodded. Once, slow. I think I can build you, the Wallace, Dorothea. She didn't cry. She was not a woman who cried easily, but she had to look away for a moment, at the street, at the gray November sidewalk, at nothing in particular. She nodded. They shook hands again. What happened next didn't happen overnight. Nothing real does. Nathaniel's company sent an assessor to the building on Clover and 5th within the week. The structure was sound. The bones were good. What it needed was gutting and rebuilding from the inside, which, as it turned out, was something Osei Construction had been doing for 4 decades. Dot was not a passive participant. Jerome, who ran day-to-day operations for the company, called her every Thursday to go over decisions. Paint colors, the kitchen layout, Whether the tool room should have a garage-style roll-up door so teenagers could feel like they were walking into somewhere real and not a classroom. She said yes to the door immediately. She called her daughter nutrition education program for a hospital system 40 minutes away and asked if she knew anyone who might want to teach cooking workshops on Saturday mornings. Renata cried on the phone. Then she said she'd come teach the first one herself. Dot called Pastor DeWitt at Calvary Baptist and asked if the congregation knew any retired tradespeople who might donate a few hours a month. Within 2 weeks, she had a retired master electrician named Howard and a plumber named Curtis who had 40 years in and nothing but time, and a willingness to tell long stories if anyone would listen. Nathaniel covered the building renovation. His foundation covered the first 2 years of operating costs. He didn't put his name on the building. He put Wallace Marsh on the sign above the door, and that was how he wanted it. The morning of the opening was cold and clear, the kind of January morning that has no interest in being pleasant, but is at least honest about it. The sidewalk in front of the building had been salted. Someone had put a pot of red geraniums by the door that would absolutely not survive the week, but were cheerful in the meantime. Dot stood outside in her blue cardigan and her good coat, the one without the torn pocket because Renata had sewn it up the night before, and she looked at the sign, the Wallace. Jerome was to her left, Nathaniel to her right, leaning on his cane. "Your husband," Nathaniel said. What was he like? Dot considered this seriously. He fixed things. Not just physical things, though he was good at that. He was the kind of man who, if you were in a room and something was wrong, he noticed, and he did something about it. Nathaniel looked at the sign. The building is named right then. The first session brought in 14 people, 11 teenagers, 2 women in their 30s, who had never learned to cook anything beyond what fit in a microwave, and a 70-year-old man named Chester, who said he'd always wanted to know how to fix a dripping faucet, and had been putting it off since 1987. Curtis fixed the faucet situation in 40 minutes. Chester shook his hand 3 times. Within 2 months, they had a waiting list. A local news crew came in March. The reporter was young and wanted to focus on Nathaniel, on the money, on the company. Dot redirected her gently toward the students. The story that aired was mostly about a 19-year-old named Aaliyah, who had come in not knowing how to boil an egg, and who had, 6 weeks later, made her grandmother's cornbread from memory for the first time. Aaliyah's grandmother had passed 2 years prior. Aaliyah said learning to make the cornbread felt like getting to talk to her one more time. That was the story. Nathaniel came by every few weeks. He and Dot developed a habit of meeting in the building's small kitchen after hours, when the students were gone, and drinking coffee from a machine that Renata had donated. Nathaniel's was too strong. Dot's had too much milk. They argued about it comfortably. One evening in April, after everyone had gone, Dot was wiping down the counter, and Nathaniel was looking at the cork board on the wall where students pinned things. Drawings, notes, a grocery list written in a teenager's handwriting, with a note at the bottom, for Grandma's birthday. He said, without turning around, "I counted the people in that waiting room. I do that, 41. She stopped wiping. "Not one of them came to the floor." He said, "I know." He turned around. "I have been in rooms full of people my entire career. Boardrooms, city council meetings. I know how to walk into a space and make people see me." He paused. "I don't know if I was scared or if I just couldn't make anyone see me that day." Lying on that floor, she set down the cloth. "You were scared," she said, "and they couldn't see you. Both things are true." He looked at her for a moment. "How do you know that?" "'Cause I know what it's like to be in a room where you're invisible." She said it quietly, without bitterness. "I've been invisible in rooms my whole life. I've learned to see the people in them anyway." He didn't say anything for a while. "Then, I think that's the most important thing one person can do for another." "Maybe so," she said. She turned off the kitchen light. He held the door. They walked out to the street together. 2 people with canes, neither of them in a hurry, the spring evening cooling slowly around them. Percival was waiting on the windowsill when Dot got home. She gave him his dinner, made herself tea. stood at the kitchen window looking at the street. Clover Street. The same street she'd lived on for 40 years. The same narrow houses, the same uneven sidewalk, the same corner where the streetlight buzzed a little after dark. But on the corner of Clover and Fifth, there was a light on now. A light that hadn't been there before. Through the window she could see the corkboard still covered in notes, and the kitchen where Renata would teach Saturday mornings, and the tool room with the roll-up door that 2 kids had already asked to come back to on a day it wasn't open. Wallace would have liked that, she thought. The roll-up door especially. She set down her tea, opened her small spiral notebook, added coffee to the grocery list, underlined it twice. The kettle started to whistle. I've been thinking about that waiting room since I first heard this story. 41 people, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Some of them surely kind people in the rest of their lives. People who love their families, who tip well, who hold elevator doors. And still, not one of them crossed the room. I don't think they were bad people. I think they were waiting for someone else to go first. That's the thing nobody tells you about those moments. There's always a reason to wait. Always a reason to let someone else handle it. The floor is hard. You might do it wrong. Might be nothing. Somebody else will go. Somebody else. And then there's Dot, a 67-year-old woman with $42 in her checking account and a torn pocket and a cane with a strip of yellow electrical tape on it. A woman no one in that room would have picked to be the one. She didn't go because she had extra. She went because she couldn't not. That's the whole thing, isn't it? The people who change things aren't always the ones with the most to give. They're the ones who can't walk past and let it be someone else's problem. So I want to ask you something, and I mean it honestly. If you were in that waiting room, what would you have done? Not what you hope you would have done. What do you think you actually would have done? Drop it in the comments. I want to know. And if this story hits something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Like this video, subscribe, hit the bell, because stories like Dot's don't belong in the dark. I'll see you in the next one.